Hi, everyone. My name is Kosoko Jackson. I am the author of two books, A Place for Wolves, which is about two boys who have to survive the Kosovo-Serbian conflict together while in love. That comes out this year, April 2nd. And then my second book, Yesterday is History, about a time-traveling high school senior who gets involved with the Stonewall movement of the 60s, and that comes out in 2020. Here we are talking about how to use diverse writing as a form of resistance and how to claim your own authentic experience. This is going to be a complete question and answer style, so it's really informal. So let's just have fun with it. And just two quick ground rules before we get started. One is that I am just one person. So if you ask 50 people, if you ask 50 people the same question, you'll all get 50 different answers. So you kind of use my answers not as a rule, but as a direction to get your brain thinking and to help form what your ideas are. Feel free to push back or to take what I say as gospel or to completely reject it. This is just to get your mind going. And then secondly and finally, that this is just to have fun. We're just trying to expand our minds. So we're going to keep this really easy. And if a question is asked that has a similar answer to one before, or I don't know the answer to it, I'll say that just to keep the conversation going. So let's get started. All right, so the first question that we have is, can you share a bit about your personal journey in claiming your own authentic experience in writing, and what did that process look like for you? So when I started writing, I've been writing for many years. I started writing novels in 2013 with the point of being published, but I've always written stories. And I think for me, the biggest way of claiming my own authentic experience was that I shifted my storytelling from being what I thought publishing wanted, stories about frankly, straight white boys, to being the stories that I wanted to see. And that was a very gradual shift. It went from telling straight white boys because that's what I thought would sell, and that would not be a risk, to writing stories about queer white boys. And then shifting that to writing about queer Black boys. That wasn't an easy shift, and it wasn't something that I did on my own. When I was doing edits with my agent for my first book, A Place for Wolves, my agent picked out that my main character was very Black coded. And so I was trying to get these issues and these topics that Black people face in the story, but using a white character. And so she suggested that I change that to being a Black main character. And that shift was not easy for me. This year and in 2018, which is strange to say was last year, we've had a big surge of African-American characters. But even before 2015, there weren't many YA with African-American characters, let alone African-American boys. So I was really, really terrified of how publishing would take that, when I thought writing a white character would be a safe bet. So for reclaiming my own experience as a queer Black man, that's what it look like for me, is to accept that not everybody will like my story, but it will find the right home and it will find the right people. And that's a hard thing to do when you're thinking about that you spent 2 or 3 years on something and that one choice could completely erase all that work, or publishing has not caught up to what you're trying to say. And that can be a terrifying experience. But I think it's stronger in the long run. And the people that I've talked to about when I've given arcs of my books have said how refreshing it is to see a Black queer character in this type of historical setting. And I think that reclaiming your experience is hard and it's dangerous and it can be scary and not everybody will like it. But I think it's really important as writers if we want to put ourselves into our work. Second question, how do you find the authentic experience that will speak to an audience? So this is an interesting thing because for me, there's a balance, and I think for a writer, a lot of authors, there's a balance between writing what appeals to an audience and writing what you want to see. And I think finding that balance is a constant push and pull, because once you start writing and publishing a book, you are in the end beholden to your publisher. You're writing to sell a book, but you also want to keep true to yourself, because what's the point of writing if you're not keeping true to yourself? Finding that balance is really, really hard. So for me, I try to find 3 things in a book that really speak to me when I'm writing. Some things I can't cave on because they're things I've agreed to the publisher, things that I know will make the book incredibly commercial and sell well. And those are choices that I make to make my book more profitable. But I always try to find 3 key things that I have in there, 3 things about commentary, 3 things about a character, 3 things that I can see myself in the book, even if it's not the main character, to keep that book feeling authentic for me. Wolves has them, and it deals with adoption, deals with African-American characters. It deals with sense of abandonment, which I have dealt with as an adopted Black boy, and it deals with queerness as a Black person in a white society. Yesterday is History, my second book, deals with the struggle of a Black person being in a very affluent white society as a Black individual, bucking against your family and your family expectations during that 17 to 18-year-old range, and the idea of first love at a time that is such a big change, which is 3 months before senior year. And so I try to keep these things to anchor me and to keep it authentic into my own storytelling. In life, things are a lot messier than in books. Do you have any tips for honing in on what things that count as experience versus oversharing and randomness? So I think, at least for me, how I do this is that when I write, I am very reserved about putting myself in my books and putting too much of myself in my books, which if you follow me on Twitter might seem kind of funny because I share a lot of myself on Twitter, but those are in short 240 character snippets, spending 80,000 words being introspective about deep things that hurt me or make me happy is hard for me to do. And I think there's a certain amount of putting yourself forward and emotional pain and emotional work that has to go into writing. I think especially as a diverse author, that's something that all of us have to do at some point, but the question is how much is too much? For me, when I figure out what the line is that I figure out what I'm talking about and at what point does it make me uncomfortable and what point does it hurt me. When I start going into that hurt area, I question, am I doing emotional pain for the reader, kind of like pain porn, or is it actually some kind of cathartic therapeutic process? Writing can be super therapeutic, and I think there is a value, especially, and there's many stories write it, where authors use writing as a way to get through some of their own issues. And I applaud that, and I wish I could do it better. But for me, if it goes into just pain and just writing it so somebody else can profit and feel good about my own pain, then I think it's too much and oversharing. And then I have to think, is this worth investing in the book, or will it hurt me or damage my psyche in the long run? As for randomness, I think some randomness is good. I think it can really add to the story, and I think it can pepper your story with things that make it an authentic story, especially if you're writing a diverse group that people don't know of very well or people don't know about very well, and you want to really ground them in the story. I fully embrace randomness personally, but I think, again, 50 different people would say 50 different things. How can diverse writers balance writing from their own authentic experience, even very personal or messy experiences, with being respectful of the experience of others in the same community that might be different? And this is really, really important because speaking from the I, Black queer man does not have the same experience as me. I grew up in a very blue town. Well, not a blue town. I went to school in a very blue town in a state that's blue. And I have not dealt with a lot of the things and the markers that you would feel are in a Black queer story. I think, and I hate to use like a standard, but if you think about it, the main single story Black narrative for queer people is that a Black kid's rejected by his family, or he had to hide his sexuality because of his community, or things like that. I didn't really have that experience, and my experience has been very lucky as a queer person, and I'm very thankful for that. But that doesn't match many people's experiences. I think the important thing is that we have to remember is that what I mentioned before, the single story, and there's a great TED Talk about this that you should watch. It's about 17 minutes long. There is nothing wrong with writing and claiming your own experience, speaking from the I, as your founding experience and what you're going to write about. The reason why this becomes a problem and becomes hard when it comes with other members inside the same community is because we don't have enough stories that pepper the lexicon of writing with diversity. We need to have hundreds, if not thousands, of queer Black boy stories by different people so that we can have that diversity. We are just starting to get a decent amount of trans stories by trans authors, while we still have a lot of trans stories written by non-trans authors. And that can not only create an inauthentic experience, but it takes away a slot from someone who is writing an authentic story to be able to publish it. Publishing is, I think, starting to understand, even though we've been screaming about it for 3 to 5 years, if not longer, the value of own voices in authentic stories. And yes, own voices is its own double-edged sword that we can have a whole lecture about. But it is super important that when people write inside the community, especially diverse authors, so they understand that writing from the I will alienate some people and won't be the reflective experience of everybody, but you can't write for everybody. Even as a non-diverse author, you can only write for yourself and the book, and hope the book finds the right people who it will gravitate towards. Once you publish this book, it's really not your book anymore, it's the publisher's book. And that's something that I think new writers, especially for me when I was new, really need to learn to latch onto, and it kind of helps push the pressure off of you. The book will find the right people. Do you have any advice for dealing with the particular brand of imposter syndrome that comes with claiming your own identity? Yeah, so that's also really, really hard. I think it's a double-edged sword again. It comes with the idea that sometimes you feel like you're not giving enough credit, or you're not doing the experience justice, or maybe you're not the right person to write it, or to go along with imposter syndrome, the survivor syndrome. There are so many queer Black authors who are trying to get published, and there's sometimes a feeling like, why was I picked to do? Why was I picked from the slush pile? Was my story actually worth it? I think that the biggest thing is that I think all authors at some point in some way deal with this, diverse or not. And I think it has more of a burden on diverse authors, but I think it's important to remember, excuse me, I think it's important to remember the value of the story, what you're writing, why this story resonates with you, what brings you joy about the story, and honestly, to keep chugging along. I have dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome with going from book 1 to book 2, and the best thing I can do and the best thing I can tell people is just to keep writing, and to that remember that first drafts are first drafts. It's hard to write sometimes, especially in this whole political climate, and to keep pushing forward and just to keep writing is the best thing you can do. There's no way to get through imposter syndrome, second book woes, writer's block without just pushing forward. And I know that whoever asked this question, this is something that we've been told a lot. That's an answer that doesn't always resonate because it seems like what everybody says, but everybody is saying it because it's the right thing to do and the best thing to do. And also stay close to your network. I mean, it's really important to have a cohort of people to help keep centering you back to your writing, and to center back why you're doing this and what the value of your writing is. Is it acceptable for a generally non-diverse writer to create a diverse world in their story to speak to the hope of what the real world can or should become? So I think that this is a question, and I knew you'd get something right like this, that really harkens back to my first point of this, which is that 50 people say 50 different things. I am personally of the mindset that a non-diverse person can write diverse stories. What kind of, I would say, raises my hackles a bit is when a non-diverse person writes a story from a diverse point of view that takes a space from someone who could tell the story inherently probably better because it's from their diverse point of view. And I can elaborate. There was a point about a year ago or a year and a half ago when I was going to write a story that tangentially dealt with immigration. And my first thing to do is, of course, which is what everybody should do, is that I went to a lot of my Latinx friends and talked to them about the book and kind of got their gut pulse check about the story. And even though it was not told from the Latinx point of view that had to deal with immigration, that is still co-opting a space that should have gone to someone who could inherently tell the story better. I think that people can write stories from a non-diverse point of view, and they can pepper their world with diversity, which is what we all should do. I'm not saying that a white person cannot write from an African-American point of view. I think that this is your story and you can do whatever you want, and no one's going to burn you forever. And even though we have cancel culture on Twitter, it's not like you're never gonna get a book deal again. I think it's important to recognize why you're doing it. What value do you bring to the lexicon or the nexus of literature by writing the story? And could somebody else tell it better? I'm not exactly sure who told me this, but I think this is a really good idea. A writer told me they have a friend who, if they're going to write outside of their lane, will read 50 to 100 books by authors in that community before deciding if they want to write in that community. Not only because they want to make sure that they are getting the authenticity right, but also because they're trying to see if their story fills a gap or if it's been done before. If your story or something very similar has been done before by somebody who is authentic and diverse in that community, why not just boost that person? That is a much better thing you can do than co-opting a story. Again, I think the people should pepper their worlds with diversity. We live in a diverse world and you should have diverse characters. It's just a little bit trickier when you're writing from that diverse point of view and you take a slot by writing outside of your own lane. How do you keep writing or approach creativity when the news is constantly such a mess? This is hard, and I think a lot of authors do this, especially during the 2016 election. A lot of authors, if you just go back to like early 2017, or if you've been to some panels with some famous authors, they talk about how hard the news cycle is for writing. When I was editing A Place for Wolves, my debut, it was in the first term of Trump's presidency, and it's hard. I am a little bit lucky because I write books that are tangentially relate to politics. My first book has to do with the Kosovo-Serbian War. My second book deals with Stonewall. These were fairly major political movements and political issues. So I lean into the politics. And I worked in politics for 4 years. I worked in nonprofits and think tanks that were tangential to politics. I worked for Rock the Vote, where I helped to get people registered to vote for the 2016 election. So for me, news puts a fire under my butt to keep writing and to keep making the world a better place, but it can be tiring. And so the biggest thing that I do is I try to find some way that is completely not connected to writing, to my craft, to my future as a writer, but that also fills my creative well. What I do is I watch comedies, and I used to hate comedies. If you know me on Twitter, there was a time where I said I cannot watch comedies and I don't find them enjoyable because I have a black heart. But I've gotten more into watching comedies. Superstore is a great one if you want a suggestion. And of course, The Good Place. And I've watched more comedies to help fill my creative well and read things that are happier and listen to happy podcasts, because then that not only keeps my creativity going, but it also allows me to detach. And then I can figure out how to include that happiness into my stories, which is important. One thing my agent said while we're working on new books is that you can have sad stories, you can have dark stories, you can have bleak stories, but what is the morsel of hope that keeps the reader going? And I think that is how, even as a writer, we keep going, by finding that morsel of hope inside our stories and inside the world around us. Can a writer addressing a taboo or difficult topic in their work be enough on its own to be considered resistance, or must a writer publicly share the story contains their authentic existence? No, I think that a writer can totally addressing a taboo or difficult topic is a form of resistance. I think bringing light to something is resistance, especially when we have things that aren't talked about or we're adding to the nexus of a topic. I think that's perfect. I think resistance takes many different forms, and resistance is what you're comfortable with. For example, with the Women's March as an example, the idea of how we protest and how we resist does not look the same to every person. That comes from comfort level, that comes to what is safe in your community. For some people like me who grew up in DC, I can march down the street and scream and be in a cohort of people and not worry about getting arrested or being beat or my family being hurt. If you grew up in a red town, like some of those women march people had, 3 people just standing on their porch was some of the Women's March movements. And that was considered a march because that is their way of resisting. You resist how is best, safest, easiest, and comfortable for you. And I think bringing light to a topic is in its own form of resistance, because there is someone who will read that story who it will resonate with, and it will change somebody's life. Maybe they won't buy the book. Maybe they'll read a snippet. Maybe they'll read the back jacket copy. Maybe they'll read the preview on Amazon. But your story will touch somebody. And we don't always need tough, difficult topic stories that tackle things in major ways and are depressing stories. Sometimes just touching on a topic is enough to have a reader sense that they are seen and that they are heard. Do you have any recommendations for books that use diverse writing as a form of resistance? How do these books do this? So I am actually in the process of moving, as you can see from my bedroom, so I don't have any of my books with me, but I am going to tweet out a list, and I apologize I did not prepare for this earlier this day, because I'm going to tweet out a list. Some of them are debut books that I have read from my debut 19 class. Some are books that have already come out. Some are older books. The reason why I want to kind of pivot this to a different time is because there are many books that I can just come on top of the head. The Bells by Danielle Clayton, Dread Nation, Bruja Born, books that diverse authors use their own identity and tackle issues of segregation, of class, of slavery. And I mean, Anger is a Gift by Marco Shira, but these are super popular books. And so I would like to create a list of books for you guys that personally for me resonate. But those are 4 books off the top of my head that just do this really, really well. Also for A Muse of Fire, which I just finished reading, does a great job of looking at mental illness rep. And there's also Shadow Song and Winter Song by J.J. Jones, which deals with mental illness rep. And I think personally in a more subtle way is a great book if you're looking for something that that's about authentic experiences. So yeah, this was great. Thank you guys so much. As always, you can contact me at Twitter at Kosoko Jackson on Twitter or KosokoJackson.com. My book, A Place for Wolves, is up for pre-order on all platforms. And I hope that this, oh, never mind. I guess we have more questions. Sorry, do not take, not take that closing to heart. Hold on, you guys. See, this always happens. We're talking and then someone else comes in last minute. It's like a class and like somebody comes in at the last second. So just wait for these questions to come in and we will continue. Oh, no, hold on for just 1 second, you guys. So yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, that's perfect, you guys. If you just want to, Kosoko Jackson on Twitter is my handle, or KosokoJackson.com. You can always contact me if you have any more questions. And my book, A Place for Wolves, is up for pre-order. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.